Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, it's a pleasure to have today Angela Sass and Adam Beaumont from University College London. Angela is Professor of Human-Centered Technology and Head of Information Security Research at UCL, and Adam is one of our PhD students. Angela really doesn't need much of an introduction. Among other, she's been working on trust and security and usability for longer than most of us have known about that problem. So without much further ado, but one interesting thing, we were at a workshop in Cambridge a couple of weeks ago, and Alma Whitten of Google said that, whenever she tries to think of users, she has a little Angela in her head telling her what she should do. So we have that very voice today so that we can all listen to it, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Cormac, for the introduction. Yeah, so basically we've split the talk sort of like in two parts. I'm going to sort of start from the usability side, and then Adam's going to take over for the economics to put in some of the economics perspective, and then we'll bring the whole thing together at the end. Yeah, so I just want to basically briefly look at what this talk today is. Rather than talking about one specific study, I want to sort of like give my view. It's sort of like it's a summary of a paper I'm working on at the moment about where I think usable security is really going or should be going. Basically what have we achieved in the last 10 years, and is that really enough, and is it really solving the problem? And I want to basically, you can guess what the answer is. I don't think we are. Basically, I want to sort of like present the perspective that we've come to. What really is the problem, and can we solve it? And I think the answer is that we need to basically use the economics of security as a framework for making decisions about what's usable and what's not usable. So as Cormac kindly said, I've been working on this problem for a long time, and for those of you, some of you will have heard this story before, but for those who don't know me, I started in 1996, and it started with a phone call from a company that I was doing some work with on a completely different usability issues. I used to work on internet video conferencing. Basically, yeah, and I started that at a time when somebody around here said, this internet thing, it'll never take off. But basically, so naturally, we were working quite a lot with BT, which was the state phone company in the UK. Now, then of course, became privatized. This phone call was about, and really this talk today is basically coming full circle. I think we're still coming back to exactly the problem where we started, and that doesn't make me very optimistic that we've solved it. So a phone call from somebody who said, we have the problem, the accountants are complaining about the cost of the help desks that we're running to reset employee passwords. Just to give you an approximate idea, at the time, BT had 400,000 employees worldwide. And they had a call center where they employed over 100 people who did nothing else all day long but reset passwords for BT's own company employees. And they had additional help desks which were dealing with what was, there used to be this thing called ISDN, for those of you old enough to remember it, basically that were dealing with resets for those customers. And then there was the BT Internet that was starting up. And basically on BT Internet, about half of all the calls they were fielding on that help desk were login related. So it was a massive problem, and basically, so the cost had tripled every year for 3 years in a row, and the accountant said, "Where's this going?" They asked me to do a study to basically look at why do our employees, these stupid users, as the guy literally said to me, why can't they remember their passwords? And we published this paper, which some of you will have looked at, and the key thing is, basically the answer is you're asking them to do something that's not humanly possible, These people had between 16 and 65 different passwords. They were told not to reuse the same password over different systems. They had to be cryptographically strong. They had 6-digit, some of these credentials were 6-digit pins that had to be changed every 30 days and so on. And basically that's not possible. You cannot remember this without writing it down. It's just not doable. But the consequence of what was going on there is still something that I'm afraid we're seeing today, is that if you look at the attitude that the users develop as a result of being faced with security policies and being asked to do things which are basically not doable, or at least not doable unless you dedicate your entire, most of your productive working day to it, is that they lose any respect for security. They see it as something that's simply a pain in the neck and something that's not worth bothering with, and it's certainly not something they would treasure and they feel they want to be a part of. And that is a problem. That's a really, that's a serious problem if people look at it that way. If you don't win the hearts and minds of those people, then basically my argument is companies end up paying for it through the nose. And some of them have started to realize that. A lot of them still quite haven't. And I think by the time the majority of organizations realize how much they're paying for it, they're going to be very angry. And, I think they're going to be asking some tough questions of security professionals. So basically, this paper was published in 1999. Alma Witten, of course, published by Johnny Can't Encrypt at the same time. So this has been good over 10 years now. What have we got? What did happen? Well, you could argue a lot have happened. We've got soups. We've got Ross, because Ross and Bruce always need to do their own thing. They started the Security and Human Behavior Conference. We now have regularly, we have papers on this in ACM conferences like CHI and CCS, Usenix, New Security Paradigms Workshop. We've had some books on the topic. At universities, you now can take modules on usable security or people in security. I myself teach a course at UCL where I work, and at Oxford. The government has kind of woken up to this, at least in the UK. I chaired a panel of people who wrote a white paper on it called Human Vulnerabilities in Security Systems. And last year, some of the people here attended it. The US National Academy of Sciences held a workshop, a 2-day workshop on usable security and privacy, the report of which I still haven't seen. I don't know if anybody else has come across it. I still haven't seen it. So some of us were there and were presenting there and in the workshop and discussion. So clearly, there is an acknowledgement that this is a problem. We should do something about it. Has it made security usable? I think not. Basically, if you look at some of the predictions that were made, the big, arguably the most famous usability guru of them all, Jacob Nielsen, said in 2000s, biometrics are highly usable, and they would replace passwords because they're so usable, and the whole problem would go away, Hasn't happened, has it? Well, if I'm looking at it, it hasn't happened. And what's been happening in usable security research, if we just for a minute now just focus on this authentication problem, is we've had a whole bag, a whole slew of allegedly more usable authentication mechanisms. And I'd just like to walk you through some of those. Basically, you have to give it to these people. They've been hanging on for what, 13, 14 years now, Passfaces, graphical authentication mechanisms. They're still there. They still basically claim it would be a good idea to replace all your passwords with Passfaces, logins, but it's really, the problem is, and we had in 2009, we finally had a paper that did basically prove to the research community something that was known in the commercial part because of a Barclaycard study that was never published but everybody knew about, which basically said as soon as you have a second account with a Passfaces login, forget it. People get completely confused. So you get good long-term memorability as long as you only have one of these, and after that it's basically, it just goes downhill. You can get all sorts of graphics. I don't know why anybody thinks that mousing, your PIN or your password in as opposed to typing it would make it more memorable. But clearly some people think it would be. You can have like, well, basically the argument is always pretty pictures. Let's give, surely people's memory for pictures is much better than, for these like meaningless strings and characters. And so you get these ideas of like, clicking on various things. And when you look at it, inevitably, basically, the security people will scream from one side of the room like, oh, but it's not secure. And then if you look at the usability, you should scream back, well, and it's taking people like, 15 minutes to basically enroll in this thing, and executing the login takes anything from 30 seconds upwards, and that really doesn't help. So this whole idea of that you could use this whole, I think this quest is misguided to come up with one mechanism that could to replace them all. One authentication mechanism to replace them all. To rule them all. And I think that's basically where the problem is that's just the wrong way of looking at the problem. So if you've got, way back in Users Are Not the Enemy, we pointed out, that performance problems with infrequently used, the vast majority of performance problems come from infrequently used passwords, not from frequently used ones. And the reality is that for a frequently used password, where you have also automaticity and memorability is not a problem, performance is very hard to beat. The 5 seconds that it takes to execute that is, you need to try, you're going to be hard pushed to come up with another authentication mechanism that's going to be as quick to execute, right? Even a biometric. Sort of like the standard, basically, on a biometric, 12 seconds is a performance level that is very hard to beat. It's very hard to push it down. You need to seriously invest. Basically, Disney at one point employed 70 people for 18 months on a project to try and get the fingerprint authentication on the gates in Orlando down under 12 seconds, and they managed to get around the 10 seconds. But, it's a serious project to tune and try and actually get it to work. So on the other hand, with infrequently used, most users would very happily trade something that takes, do something that takes 30 seconds if it's something that they can remember. And so, and this is actually one of the things that completely flummoxes me, is whenever I look at anybody discussing usability of authentication, that really we should radically just split it into infrequently and frequently used authentication, and not try and use the same thing for both. You need basically to trade memorability for execution time when it comes to infrequent logins, and clearly when something that people need to if you're talking screen locks, if you have a master password that you use to get into your main system, and you need to keep the screen lock on, and basically most people type the stuff 30 times a day at the moment. You need it to be quick, really quick, and easy and error-free performance. Now, we've had all these kind of things like graphical passwords, like Deja Vu. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, the people up in it's Toronto, isn't it? Basically, Paul van Oorschoot, is it? Ottawa. Is it Ottawa? Thank you. Sorry, thank you. Yes, Paul van Oorschoot's group at Ottawa, Sonia Kierson, Alain Fonger, and they basically came up with this persuasive queued Clickpoints mechanism, which starts to finally take the authentication with a graphical mechanism down to a level that I would say starting to get competitive. So basically between sort of 7 to 9 seconds, depending on exactly how many pictures you're using. And it also, this mechanism quite neatly avoids a lot of the security problems that other graphical mechanisms have, which is because wherever you click on, you have a starter image, and wherever you click, it will bring up another image. It's just if you click on the right, on basically your point on the image, it will bring up the next image that you need, and you click then on the next point and the next point. So it doesn't give the attacker any inclination what the correct answer is, So I think that's basically sort of like the best performance we had. But still, whether it would really replace, for people who are used to basically typing a lot and handling the keyboard, whether it's really the right mechanism, I don't basically, yeah, so here you can basically see it will bring up wherever you click. Drawing, basically it started with Draw a Secret, and then Jeff Young from Newcastle University in the UK, when the security people scream from one side of the room, but it's not secure, the number of the shapes that people come up with is very limited, and so Jeff said, well, I can make them draw a bigger variety of things by putting some pictures underneath. And of course, it's got this instant appeal. It's like, whenever you show pretty pictures, people go, ooh and ah. And, is this really, whether you'd really want to, with a handheld device, stand there and start drawing on your things, to get it. And it's again, if whether it's on your iPhone or on one of these devices, if you look at how long it takes, to basically enter a strong password on an iPhone keypad, when you need to suddenly start toggling between three different keyword displays, suddenly you're up to way over 30 seconds for standard entry. We've had these kind of things, GrIDsure, so it's an idea of this is a one-time PIN. The whole idea is like that if attackers can capture your credential once, but so here the idea is you get a different PIN every time, because you see it whenever you want to log in or you want to basically pay, it will display this grid, and you have a secret shape on it, and you read off you read off your PIN from the location and enter it. The security people scream from one side of the room, that's not secure, because the number of, the types of shapes that people will pick is very predictable. So basically people will pick simple shapes like squares, or lines, and they'll inevitably pick shapes that touch on an edge somewhere, and that basically takes it down to a much smaller thing. Memorability performance was actually, we did a trial on this, which we're publishing in the British HCI conference this year, which is was actually reasonably good, even after long periods of time. It's potential. But basically things are getting more ridiculous by the month, as far as I'm concerned. Basically we've had authentication via Rorschach ink blot test. 2 years ago, Musi Pass, singing at the computer. Basically, we've had a couple of years before that, thinking your password, and then the EEG reads off the thing at the back. Brucey got very excited over, you think your password on an fMRI scanner, you can then see, where it's going. The biometrics scene, I think we can illustrate by, the biometrics that we have are so good that every month somebody comes up with a different kind of biometric you could use. So, we've had everything, from ear, your ear is unique, and you just take a picture of that. Now it's the nose, is one of the latest thing we've seen, which keeps suggesting to me, it's like, if they're desperately scrabbling around for something else to use, but none of the existing ones are working well enough to get you the performance at a reasonable level of effort and cost. So we also have had this, sorry, I had to put this in, suggestion of, you might ring up your friends in the middle of the night to ask them to give you some codes, that you've previously stored with them.
For the record, what we found is people do not call their friends in the middle of the night. Instead, they wait, a week to actually complete the authentication.
Well, which is exactly makes my argument. It's like, if you really need to get back, if it's for something that doesn't matter, fine. But if you really need to get back if you really need to get something done, then that's not acceptable, and you can't even wait till the morning. So I just really want to question of whether this is really is this really stuff that's going to work for people out there. I think we can say that in the real world, it's made frighteningly little difference. You basically there've been several companies, as I said, all kudos to Passfaces. Those guys just keep going. I don't know how they do it, but somehow they do. But other companies have gone bust. I don't know, sort of like if you basically look at VIDOOP, this was a bit, where they use image categories. So you basically could say I've got the kitty category and the dog category. And then it doesn't show you the same picture every time, but you get different. You just need to recognize. So this is a picture of a dog, and this is a picture of a baby. You read off the letter or the number, and all you had to do was type in 2 letters, and it's combined with a soft token on your machine. That does all these things.
It seems that a lot of people with good technical products also go bust.
Yes. Well, Yeah.
Say 90% of the technically good products go bust.
But that's actually exactly my argument. They may technically be quite good, but I mean, this company went bust. I think they made the news because the employees they couldn't pay the last month's salary, so they told the employees to take their computers home instead in lieu of payment. In the biometrics area, pay by touch, very widely touted, was floated on the stock market. I mean, there is some, there may have been some business irregularities, but there's also definitely that the supermarket chains who tried to collaborate here basically just found, that a couple of months of use and you can throw the scanners away. They're just not robust enough to take, people coming in with all sorts of sand and dirt and things on their hand, and it's just not, it's just not a workable solution in the long run.
Can you blame them? Passmark got bought out for tens of millions, right?
What's that?
The company that makes SiteKey, what became SiteKey for Bank of
Right.
America.
Oh, right,
They were
yes.
bought out by RSA.
Yeah. But is it widely deployed and used?
Oh, it's widely deployed and used. It doesn't work. But
It
it's widely
doesn't deploy and used. It doesn't.
Lots
Yeah.
of
It
money,
doesn't.
so-
So yes, SiteKey. Yeah. We could, basically, I've just picked a few examples here. We could pick a few more. I mean, in the UK, we've had basically these kind of sleeve readers where you basically insert your credit card into a reader and it gives you a time code. And the banks are saying, yes, it's great. We've rolled it out to X number of people. But the truth is, of course, it's either you use it or you give up the idea of using online banking. And so they're forcing people, and they sort of they will then quietly say, oh, those few cranks, who don't want to use it. They, good riddance, let them go somewhere else, they're just a pain in the neck anywhere. But actually when we do surveys, people complain to us quite a lot that they find it, that they constantly find that they're on the road. A lot of the people who use online banking have a nomadic lifestyle and they basically keep forgetting to bring the device along. And then, they say, in the end, I need to ring up my wife at home, tell her where the device is and give her all my credentials so she can, impersonate me and pay the bill on time. So we're not ending up with a fine or a bad credit record. That's what's really going on, when the banks are saying it's working fine. Cormac and his colleague had is it Dine? How he pronounces it? Done these studies, and this is how users really cope. They and we've basically confirmed this. They start to make a strategy of grouping different accounts according to their perceived risk or sensitivity, and then reuse passwords across different accounts. And typically, also what they do is they have their most secure password, and when that gets expired by the system that they use it on, they then try and roll it down and roll it across the different other types of groups that they have. So the sharing is still basically pretty rampant, and the rate of forgetting is still pretty rampant, and it's the kind of I think this is an illustration from colleagues at the US Department of Transport, who basically said this is really how users feel about it. They feel like it's a pressure cooker still, all the demands that are being made on them from authentication. The paper we had at CHI this year it was basically sort of like doing more a detailed study, following people around over a day, asking them to write down every time they had to log in. And even though both of these companies had single sign-on, the actual number of passwords that the users had in this company was at least as high as it was 10 years ago, or over 10 years ago when we did the first study. The SSO makes de facto in the end little difference, because so much of the services are being outsourced. There's third-party services, and then of course they bring their own authentication. If you have like Bloomberg or Reuters services in the bank, they have their own authentication mechanism that they have to use, because for Reuters or Bloomberg it's a licensing issue, a revenue protection issue, and they're not going to bring it under the single sign-on that the bank is using for their own systems. So really, we found that people were still complaining. They were still spending quite a lot of time physically just typing things in, and reuse and sharing was still very common. So they were recycling the passwords across exactly as we found in the end consumers' requirements. Sharing between groups, between members of a group, emailing passwords around is quite common. And the other thing that was very nice, we found that basically most people now either proactively or reactively use the password reminders to get themselves a nice, basically, little file store of all their passwords. They'll all be sitting in an email folder in one of their email, which of course is another vulnerability. Also, still the quest, to try and keep the cost of managing passwords down in the organizations that we looked at is still increasing, is still going on. So they're basically saying help desks are too expensive. If you get reset rates of, most companies will balk at reset rates even around 3% and say it's too expensive.
3%
per month, per month. Most of them are saying anything under, basically, if it's over 1% a month, utterly unacceptable. Some of them are even saying, basically, if it's a tenth of a percent a month, the cost is unacceptable.
10%, 1% a month, you have to remember a password for 8 years.
No. They're saying it's like if, these are basically typically they're sitting on either 3-month expiry or 150-day expiry cycles. But they're saying is if we have to reset per month, 1%, the cost is. And they've run basically, one of the things they've tried is to have generic help desks, which also do the password resets. And of course, they find, the problem is they are, the people who work on this help desk now have to develop a split personality, where they're generally trying to be helpful and get things done very quickly. But on the other hand, you're talking about one of these organizations was a big distributed bank, where you have people ringing in from various sites. You don't really know those people, and that when you're trying to be helpful, when somebody says, I've locked myself out, you're very quickly giving the credentials to social engineering attacker, and that's basically a problem. So is it actually, is the question, is it possible to get something that is secure and works? We think it is possible, but we just have to accept, we have to basically, I think, change the perspective and really look more from what really does acceptable and usable mean from the point of users and from the point of the main activity that they do, and start to develop basically a way of measuring economically what that workload is costing us. So at that point I want to hand over to Adam to introduce you of where we've taken the usability work into an economics of security framework.
Thanks, Angela. So yeah, I'm going to go through some of the sort of economic background that we were trying to put together to support a different way of making decisions about security, and what we're trying to do to kind of combat the kind of sort of problems Angela is talking about. So my background is not economics at all. This is something that I've sort of read up on as part of getting interested in a way of tackling this. So, but I will cover the sort of basics that are underpinning some of this. The key concept is this idea of preference and indifference, which is basically about consumers making purchasing choices. Now, the reason that economics kind of came into our discussions in the first place is that it's a really old and very well understood field that's got a lot of theories that are embedded and have been studied for a long time. So we're trying to kind of piggyback on the success and the sort of credentials of economics, if you like. Okay, so when they talk about preference and indifference, that what they're really saying is given two bundles of goods, A and B, and I've used DVDs and video games to sort of illustrate this. You can ask someone to make a choice, which would you prefer, bundle A or bundle B? And by asking them a sort of series of these questions, you can build up a picture of what their sort of purchasing choices are going to be like. And an interesting point when you're doing this is to find the point at which they're indifferent to which options they get, i.e. at which point they find the two options to be equivalent. Then you can start changing the options and trying to figure out the rates at which they like to change that, i.e. how much they prefer one thing to another. So another second example there, if they prefer DVDs twice as much as games, if we offer them 70 DVDs and 5 games, if we take one DVD off, we have to replace it with 2 games to keep the bundle equivalent. And at this point, they will be happy to select either of those because it fits into their purchasing preference to keep their utility, as it's called, their sort of overall satisfaction with the offer the same. So from sort of analysing and sort of building a picture of these purchasing choices, we can construct an indifference curve, which essentially shows the rate at which you're willing to trade off between these two goods. So the curve is it's sort of ISO utility, if you like. So all the points on that curve, the consumer is equally satisfied with the options that they're being given. As we reduced one, if we take away the DVDs, we have to replace it with games to keep their satisfaction identical. And this sort of notion of trade-offs is very important. If we understand how an entity trades off between two options, then we can sort of start to understand their behaviour under certain situations. So in the consumer sense, when you're a consumer will make trade-offs when they're purchasing goods, and as in the utility, the indifference curve example, a trade-off occurs when increasing one forces you to decrease another. This is very well understood in economics and not necessarily so well understood in security. For example, the sort of classic security objectives of CIA, it's often considered that confidentiality and integrity are, confidentiality and availability are opposed, and that increasing one means you have to decrease the other. But it's a fairly nebulous boundary. The definitions vary depending on who you talk to, and it's not a very easy thing to understand. So what we're trying to do is trying to sort of get into this and try and find out how people are making these choices and how they're sort of trading off between these sort of security questions when they're presented with them. So we interviewed employees from all ranges, sort of security managers down to sort of reception staff across two companies, one a kind of more technical company and one a financial institution. And from their answers, a sort of picture came up. And a key point in their answers is that the perspective that you take is exceedingly important. And everyone has their own view on what the cost is. And this can lead to quite a big discrepancy between what an organisation might think the cost is and what the actual individual that's actually undertaking any activity might perceive it to be as well. So when we're factoring these things, when we're sort of trying to build up a picture and build up a model for this, we have to consider whose perspective we're taking and actually consider what their perceived cost is rather than what the actual measurable cost or any kind of sort of arbitrary truth value might be. And right down to the point that a cost to one entity might be considered to be a benefit to the other, and this particularly when you have a clash between organisations and individuals, where the organisation might think, great, we're going to lock all access to social networking sites. This means that we're much more secure and we're not leaking information, and they see that as a benefit, and the guys on the ground who use that to communicate or to make touch with clients or to do research find it as a massive imposition.
When you say perceived cost, are you saying that for some people the burden placed by some security mechanism is not as bad as they think it is, but they respond to, that it really only takes 5 seconds a day from me, but I really respond as though it's a great deal more than that?
Exactly. I mean, I'll probably touch on this a little more later, but also the circumstances for exactly the same task. I mean, if you come in at the start of the day and you're fresh and ready to go, and someone says, "Oh, can you just can you run this small errand for me?" You'd be like, "No problem." And if you're just about to walk out the door and someone says, "Can you do exactly the same thing?" it'll seem like a much more onerous chore. So, understanding that while the task remains the same, the how the person doing it perceives it, that's a sort of really important thing to get hold of. So from these interviews and from asking people these security questions and how they'd respond to, we were asking them about how they'd react if encryption was mandated on USBs and other things like that. How would that change their working day? How would they perceive the sort of benefits of that? We could have come up with this idea, which we referred to as the compliance budget, which is how individuals, as it says, assess the effort involved in the task they're being presented with. And again, this idea of perceived effort. When their perceived effort exceeds what they see as the benefit of that, they start to feel like that's a cost. And this is a sort of cumulative thing that is over time and depends on how much they've already been burdened as well. And as the users approach this threshold, so the budget means literally that it's a finite amount that people of effort that people are willing to put into compliance with security. For most people, security isn't their primary task. There's something else they'd rather be getting on with, or it's necessary for them to get on with, for them to get paid, etc. So as you approach the limit of their budget, it becomes security feels more onerous for the person doing it because they're already quite burdened, and that means that the organisation has to put from their end more time, effort, and resources into trying to ensure compliance from their workforce. So this is a kind of sketch graph. This is based on interviews, so not some sort of numerical data to back it up, but this is the kind of behaviour that we would predict from the answers that we were getting from the workforce. So the vertical axis is the effort the organisation is having to put in to get compliance out of their workers and their users. And the horizontal axis is the effort that the users are putting into compliance. The vertical dotted line is this threshold, this compliance budget limit that we feel people sort of run into. So when the individual effort is low, the organisation doesn't have to put much effort into ensuring compliance. Most people these days have an understanding that security is relevant and important, and they'll happily go along with a few tasks. But as you sort of increasingly burden them and get towards the threshold, people start to feel more disgruntled. They're feeling more sort of put upon. These security is getting in the way of what they're trying to do, and it becomes more difficult to ensure their compliance. Once you push people over the threshold, that is the kind of toys out of the cot moment where people think, well, just stuff this. I've had enough. I want to get on with my job, and they just start looking for workarounds, and they kind of abdicate from taking part in security as much as possible. And at that point, the user effort is really they're not putting any energy into doing it, and the organisation is going to have to put all their resources, much more resources, into trying to get this compliance with this heavily overburdened workforce. Hence, why the fact that once you go over the threshold, it kind of ramps up to increasingly ridiculous levels to try and enforce all this stuff onto your workforce. So it is possible to influence this decision, though. This isn't a sort of horribly intractable problem. The guy in the middle is every time he's faced with a security task, he's going to make a compliance decision. Am I going to go along with it, or am I going to try and seek an easier workaround that just allows me to get on with my day in a more efficient way? And there's sort of good and bad, if you like, or sort of nice and nasty ways of trying to influence this compliance decision. So we see this as basically a cost-benefit analysis, a la this sort of economic thinking. And as Andrew said, the sort of common perception is that users are sort of stupid and lazy, but increasing research from Cormac and others, people are actually making pretty rational decisions about security. They're not just being sort of arbitrarily dumb and avoiding it. They're thinking actually it isn't actually worth my time. So this kind of cost-benefit analysis is taking place, and we want to influence this in such a way that we're going to increase the benefits and reduce the costs. And this reducing the cost, I think, is probably the low-hanging fruit here. So things like designing this security system, and as I mentioned before, what time of day you do the task. Automated patching is a nice example. If when you turn your computer on in the morning, it says we're now going to take your computer out of your hands for 15 minutes while we install patches and force you to restart. That's really sort of gets you off to a bad start in the day. You put that decision in the hands of the users, and you say, you have to patch at some point today, but when you're ready, please sort of click here. Then when they're going off for lunch or taking a break or going into a meeting, they can do it. Security remains exactly the same, but the user, the cost to the user, the effort they perceive they're having to put into it is substantially reduced without changing the level of security. That's an example of how design. Culture, again, trying to this is fairly sort of common idea, trying to increase the sort of awareness of security in an organisation. But again, this goes back into this cost-benefit thing. If you're more aware of the need of security, then you see more benefit, and you reduce the situations in which the effort appears to be a cost because you're weighing it against the sort of benefits. On the sort of slightly harsher side, you can start bringing sanctions and monitoring to sort of either through software or hardware to enforce whatever policy you're trying to do as well, which again, users would like to avoid running afoul of sanctions, things like that. So what you're basically doing then is rather than you're upping the cost of failure to comply, basically, in this sense, which makes it seem more attractive to go along with it.
In this model, so the compliance decision is made. I mean, all the negative comes from the organization itself, right? The idea of bad guy influencing, the idea that my decision is based on the possibility of a bad outcome is not, other than a sanction or monitoring, is absent, right?
What you mean, as in, like, they fear the sort of...
That a bad guy hacks into my account and something bad happens, but that's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is somebody notices that my password is weaker than it should be, or that I'm not complying in some way that I should. This is about influence the sort of compliance in that sense. I guess what you're talking about then is sort of fits sort of slightly into the culture thing. Is that if they fear the effects of weak security, then they see the benefit of doing security, and so it sort of comes in as a sort of in that side. So I have had this diagram is slightly misleading because of the green and red, and I'm thinking about changing it because people sort of see it as kind of good and bad. But yeah.
I see that being rolled into the kind of culture thing, being aware of security and seeing it as a good thing rather than...
If you're aware of the risk, then that reduces the benefit perception, and since it's about the ratio between perceived cost and benefit, you can basically reduce the
But
cost.
or also these other two feedback channels are there because the benefit, we can't show the benefit directly. We have to amplify that channel through other means.
Yeah. And obviously, and the reason it's sort of put in is it's sort of cyclic form here as well, is that the results of what you did last time influences what you do next time as well. If you don't comply and you sort of get away with it, you might be more inclined to comply next time because you're sort of fearing the increased rate of sanctions you might get by continual failure to comply. And likewise, if you've been complying all day and being a jolly good employee, then you've accepted a lot of burden, and that might make you less likely to comply next time because you're kind of reaching towards your threshold as well. So it is, these aren't isolated decisions; they're taking place in a sort of overtime context as well. So this is all this sort of compliance thing and trying to understand how users are making these cost-benefit decisions and sort of trading off between their sort of choice paths is interesting because it brings up this idea of technical versus effective security, and this is I think an idea that is important to push. Is that these systems security relies heavily on users complying to be effective, and even if a system is really well designed technically, if no one's using it properly, you're going to get really, really bad security out of it. And this creates a disconnect between what's the sort of predicted security, what your planners have planned, and what's actually happening on the ground. And sort of historically and stereotypically, I suppose, security is planned by very technical-minded people who may not be. Sorry.
You mid-sentence.
Well, let me just finish and then I'll give us the question. Who aren't necessarily very aware of these kind of issues. Passwords is a really neat idea that goes into the authentication stuff that Andrew's talking about. You mandate this sort of 12-character, 4 special characters to uppercase. Looks like a really solid, nice password. It's going to be resistant to all kinds of attacks, difficult to show and serve, difficult to crack. But it's going to be written down on a post-it note. So your discrepancy between what you've planned and what the real-life security of your system is quite marked. And there's more to say on that involved in the next slide. So you want to jump in now?
So just the statement that security relies on user compliance. Social engineering also relies on user compliance.
That is true.
And so it seems that creating an environment where users comply with anything that's stated as from the security department, unless you've got a really clear statement of how do you know it comes from your true security people. It may be that security is in fact not compatible with compliance, or that if you're going for high compliance, this is the same exact strategy that your attacker is going for.
I guess that's an interesting point. I guess maybe I sort of separate compliance with existing policies with sort of blindly following orders. I mean, there is...
Not much I bring this up because many of the emails that we get at Microsoft and at every previous employer and organization I've been affiliated with, there was no clear policy about this is how you know this is an email you're supposed to comply with. It comes from blank in HR. You're told you're supposed to watch this compliance video. And on some of them, you're lucky enough that your organizational chain actually does point out this is important, you should do it. But basically what they keep beating into you is you're going to be getting emails from random people within your organization whose names you haven't heard before. Comply with them. Do it. And
so there's a good soup paper for next year. You just send out a mail to Microsoft Research, Redmond all, and tell people to watch a videotape on some random like piano and see how many people do it.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting point. Yeah, and you're right. Like pushing it too far the other way and making people just kind of go. Well, that does open up other security. But then all security planning requires iteration. That you put one fix in place, you have to see the knock-on implications. So yeah, I think.
Compliance with existing policy can also be a black art issue. So I gather the guy who disclosed the taxpayer details of half the people in Britain, he didn't follow the rules, but the rules were so secret he wasn't allowed to read them.
Well,
That's actually, I think it's pointing at another. It's basically it's linking to something. It's one of the things that we would actually say is like a lot of the security at the moment is the boxes that are drawn around the problem are far too small. And there is, basically very few organizations really have big picture security where, all this is taken together. So basically if you are disseminating that kind of information, you better make sure that your communication channels are working on that. Basically your employees can correctly identify whether a communication is coming from who they claim to be, versus not. But basically, if you just keep pushing all this stuff down, and people have no reliable way of telling whether it's really from one or the other, then of course it won't work. But that again is it's just another a few things that are never in most organizations are never tied together. Anyway, so if we just finish up.
So. Sort of bringing some of this stuff together and thinking about trade-offs in the context of security. For a user in terms of sort of generating and using passwords, we can say there's the sort of core trade-off is between the ease of use of the password in terms of sort of memorability and the sort of cognitive load that they're placed under by using it, and resistance to attack. Move towards a more resistant password, then this, in 9 cases out of 10, requires increasing the burden on the user and reducing its ease of use. And this is interesting, and relating back to this idea of sort of planned versus security actually being delivered, is that at some point, as you burden your users and you push them towards this sort of compliance limit, they're going to start to adopt insecure behaviours to cope with the effort that they're putting under. The password gets put on the post-it note, it gets shared with the colleagues, whatever the workaround is, or whatever the sort of technical mechanism is. The behaviour, the coping mechanism will introduce insecurities into the organisation in order to cope with this. So the implication of this is that your best security your best security results from when you're asking people to do, you're asking to take effort, put into effort in security that is equivalent to or just below their compliance threshold, which means that's the security you should be planning for as well. Now, in the instance of a technically very well planned but very harsh on the user security system, that's then is encouraged a whole bunch of workarounds, you might actually get more effective security by reducing or weakening your policy down to below this sort of this threshold where your users are beginning to adopt insecure behaviours, which I think can come across as a slightly counterintuitive notion, but understanding how users are going to respond and what their behaviour is going to be as a result of your security policy, I think the aim is the delivered security at the end, not trying to push them into this mould of this rigid security structure. And the trade-offs sort of continue up into the organisations as well. And if you're making your passwords more resistant to attack, then there'll be the usability for the users is going to go down. This puts more costs onto password resets and the reset calls, like Angela was talking about at BT as well. So it is a lot of organisations run on a financial basis, looking to the bottom line. You can also save money by making your users not be having to sort of go through all this process and burden them too. So I understand this can have benefits for security and sort of financial rewards as well. Do you want to run through the conclusion?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the importance of really understanding the cost is something. This is like it's a story that we've encountered again and again. We've just talked about authentication and passwords here, but we've seen similar patterns basically emerging when it comes to basically people encrypting, employees in organizations encrypting their data, digital certificates. I should basically say, so we're currently trying to give these ideas a better empirical basis. So we're now working with a third company where we're conducting 100 interviews with employees basically from both, basically shop floor level up to managerial level about compliance and non-compliance with the various policies the organization has. And this will be followed by, we actually had, when we put an advert in the company newsletter, and we had 450 people volunteering to be interviewed. And this is is like more than we can really do. So what we're now planning to do is, after we've done the 100 interviews, we're going to pick sets of policies that affect various parts of the organization, and then do a survey with the remaining volunteers, where we're going to ask them to rate the effort level that's involved with compliance. And so we're hoping to build a proper empirical basis for where exactly these decision points lie. But I've also seen it in basically working for the UK government, which has these ideas of let's put all our government services online, else we can save, we can basically plug the big gap in the household by just basically closing down all the offices and all the call centers and just make people transact online with government. But basically the kind of, the enrollment mechanism, how a citizen would prove to the government that it was designed by GCHQ, which is the security agency, and basically in a pilot trial that was done is 19 out of the 20 people didn't manage to successfully enroll in it, and all 20 of them said there was no way they'd actually use this. Similarly, we're currently doing a study with 30 people who are using OpenID. They're very heavy internet users, quite technically savvy. And we introduced them to OpenID and asked them to use it for a week and to just video themselves at home when they're using it. And basically, it's not the number of people who said at the end of the week that they would use OpenID, or wouldn't use OpenID, is pretty much, it's very close to the 30 people who are participating in this, because simply the what they're getting, the effort is quite huge, and the perceived benefit of it is just far too low for them to. They just go no, I've got other things to do in my life. I'm moving. I'm not doing this. So really, to tie this up, we want to say that we need to go beyond this whole. I think just the idea that users are the enemy and users are stupid is just a very unhealthy perspective. Just look at it as as a neutral economic problem of basically effort and benefits, and that you need to strike the right balance between efforts and benefits. So I basically go basically this idea of it's still, even people who say human factors is a problem, they still paint, but the people are the problem. It's because they're stupid, it's because they don't care. And it's not. I think basically by bringing together usability and the economics research, we can demonstrate it's just people are, basically it's a question of effort. And that's basically, we just need, it's a kind of discourse where we need to tell the security people, to just not basically keep putting these negative connotations on it. Because also the next thing then they always say is the solution is to educate users. And I'm going no, you're going to educate them to spend more and more of their daily time, on doing security related tasks, and now we're going to add the education effort, we have to add that time on top of it as well. It's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. So really we have to stop overburdening users. It reduces the likelihood of compliance, and it ruins personal productivity and organizational productivity, and we've got various examples of that, some of them in the published work, some is still forthcoming. Part of the problem is that security at the moment is simply not designed to fit with, it's this idea that it's one authentication mechanism to rule them all. We just have to get away from that. There are certain individual tasks, and there is in organizations in particular, you need to design solutions that fit within what the organization is doing, the way it does its business. The idea is that there is a standard security solution that you go and implant. It's just ridiculous, frankly. The other thing is that I just wanted to show you something. The whole is we found in interviews we've done with chief security information officers is they all the time, every day now, have to justify to the board of directors what they are doing, what the security they are doing is, how much is it costing, and how much risk reduction are we getting out of it. This is a theme that comes up every day with CISOs. And so what we've been doing in the HP project is to try and basically build a tool where we can put the operational cost of security, including the amount of user time that's being spent on it, into a tool where the CISO can basically see is, if I'm now introducing this security mechanism, it will affect these users in the organization. It's going to cost this much of these people's time. You can connect it to the salary, but also not forgetting the opportunity cost that's basically associated with consuming certain employees' time. And so they can basically see, and balance the risk reduction and get a better understanding. We called the NSPW paper Usable Security by Stealth, because we're not actually really talking about usability, we're just talking about productivity and factoring into the cost that it's running. And I actually think that's a better way of getting through to CISOs. They are human beings too. Their primary task is now to basically get risk reduction but justify it in terms of cost. And so if we roll the usability in there, that might actually be a way forward of actually really getting usable security on the ground, which so far I don't think we've seen. So that concludes our talk for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Questions? I seem to see that one of the major hurdles that's being run into here is the idea of having basically your password soup that you have to remember the various passwords and deal with various means of authentication. Is having like a program that has a master password that you enter the one and then it can have an encrypted file of various other logins and passwords that are different and possibly incredibly cryptographically secure, having that one program with the master password that can unlock your other accounts by entering in the right gibberish text, is that considered too hackable or too unsecure to be employed as a methodology, or is that just not widely implemented?
It will work. I mean, basically, this is the Schneier solution, right? I mean, sort of like if you're somebody who looks after lots of different organizations' credentials, right, and you can't afford to have the same password on them, you need different passwords, and basically that's how he copes. He basically has this, and it's a personal. It's his own personal master password file. In some organizations, you have sort of a single sign-on or a part single sign-on of what you described there. The answer is it depends. It works in some organizations, but the more, then you need people who really, from a technical side, who look after this technology base very well. Because very often what we found, I mean, certainly in one of the banks that we're working with, is you get this automatic log through, and then when the connection breaks between the master password and the application, basically it now needs to log you into various applications. And inevitably, several times a month for most people, it breaks somewhere. And then, of course, they have no idea whatsoever what the password was, and you need to go back and recover the, account and basically set it up new again. So it's a nice idea in a way, but we've seen in practice that it doesn't seem to work very well in most organizations. And it's still, you get a lower number of incidents, but they're still going to cost you a lot of time and effort.
And again, there's a trade-off thing as well, is that you're trading off. It's more usable, less burden to use it, but of course it's a very brittle solution in that if the master password goes and if someone's using it regularly, then maybe it will, then there's one breach loses you a lot of stuff all at once as well. So I guess if you're happy making that trade-off, if you're comfortable taking that level of risk, then it's an acceptable solution.
I just want to clarify that approach existed long before Schneier, and it can be done completely statelessly without having to carry around the file.
But it needs to be, you need to be really, from an organizational point of view, the organization really needs to be in control of its system. And what we've increasingly observed is that doesn't seem to be happening. And particularly the more you do outsourcing, the more you get basically a diversity of different solutions, and other providers coming in, then it gets really hard to maintain that and to make it work.
I would point out Mira Belenke and Tolga Achar at Microsoft had a recent paper on this. I don't know if outsiders can read it, but insiders certainly can.
Right.
It's a system where if the master file is lost, all is not lost.
So you need, and you need that kind of backup, because I have a collection of some case studies of people who lost, who basically lost their master password file, or lost the device where they'd stored it on, and then basically, effectively, what you then need to accept is that you're going to spend 2 weeks of your life, basically getting the accounts back on all the different things. So Adam.
Going back to Cormac's question a little bit, a lot of this seems to relate to the fact that there's not a tight feedback loop between a computer security failure and a user choice, right? That if I do something that gets my system infected by a virus, I might have no idea what it is. Or if my corporate email system is hacked, I might not know the action that I took that led to it. And so I'm wondering how much of what you're hearing from the people in the field being asked to do these things relates to the fact that they actually don't know what really causes a problem. It's something happened sometime in the past, I don't know exactly what I did.
It's very, very true, and this is, and if we're at all, basically I always think I'm very, I'm not totally anti-user education, but I'm just saying, the idea that a lot of security people have about it is just fundamentally misguided. Clearly, we have the problem at the moment that a lot of users can't connect the specific behavior to a specific risk, and they don't understand what the connection between the two is. Once they do understand it, it will influence the perceived benefit. So basically it can reduce the perception of cost because they realize that it's a benefit to them personal, and also most people are not sociopaths, and so if it affects the organization and their colleagues and so on, that's a benefit they will also take on board. Most people quite happily do that. But it needs to, I think, it can still only work if if an organization really starts to rationalize the security behavior it requires from its employees. I still think, when we just went recently, we looked at like two so-called security education programs in two major organizations, right? And they had hired communication professionals to design this stuff for them, and that implemented something I've been saying for a very long time. It's like translate the required behavior down into simple do's and don'ts for users, right? So that basically done. Now, when I basically looked at it and I just copied all the do's and don'ts and pasted them into a list, I ended up with over 400 in most cases, right? And when you then look for each company, I'm not kidding you. This is, and you look at, and then when you look at it, basically there is of course contradictions between different policies, and you're leaving it then and as long as you've got a mess like that, I don't think it can work. It could work if you basically go back and you rationalize your policy, you pull back to the things you really care about, and you come up with a workable set of policies, you come up with something that's coherent for each user group that you're targeting, then this could work, would be my argument.
So, along the economic lines, there was the argument made that the forced reboots are something that should be put back in the hands of users. Now, I'm no fan of forced reboots, and I think they can be implemented a heck of a lot better than they are today. But what you see with a lot of users, say, forcing themselves to shut down their internet every night at 10 p.m., or forcing themselves to leave Facebook for a month, or what have you, is that they understand that they're procrastinators, right? Procrastination is an endemic problem for users. And if it's, you need to do this in the next 8 hours, I don't think it's realistic to expect them to think, oh gosh, I'm going to lunch, this would be a great time to reboot my computer. I think that's being overly optimistic about where users are focused and what their attention is on.
I think that's probably true. It was an exemplar case, idea of it, but I think the point to make was if you wish to automate it, that's fine, but automate it at a time that would be convenient as well. And you can automate it on next shutdown, for example, which it takes a choice in the hands of the users.
Which could be a few months.
No, but it can also be basically, I think this is something where we can actually use technology well to become a lot smarter, because you, if you, and it's partly that, it's partly just dialogues, between people who understand the business processes and who understand the
I'm not arguing that. Yeah.
Activity
As
is
I said,
to find
it can be done a lot better. It can be, if you want another 4 hours, you need to, an email is going to be sent to your manager, please write the justification statement for why you took another 4 hours
but
to
basically
reboot.
doing it, forcing it at the wrong point, the cost associated with that can be absolutely huge. If you basically interrupt, an important production task at the wrong time, then the perceived cost is huge.
But if you look at what happened with the Google, with the Google Aurora breach, I mean, that was IE6 should get upgraded. That should have happened 6 years ago.
But it's that to do, basically where we can get smarter is the kind of signaling we're using. We're basically how we communicate to users, So basically if you had like, a risk meter, sort of like with patching, for instance, or the force shut, where you have a risk meter where you say like you've now left it this long, and you're in the, in the very red, then most people would find, sort of like the least, would basically get around to finding the least worst time to accept, to basically get that job done. Do you see what I mean?
I'm actually skeptical there, because I think the other economic thing that you see is people have this concept of a sunk cost. Similar to a sunk cost, heck, it's been 3 weeks since I was supposed to reboot and I'm not compromised yet. Another day is not going to hurt.
But you need to, again, but you can also balance it with, like, basically once people have some understanding of what the actual cost of a breach would be, and they can relate, they can empathize with that cost, then it tends to make them. I mean, this has actually been tried in various crime prevention kind of contexts, and it does seem to work. If you can empathize, like, if you now get hacked, what is the cost that's resulting from that for yourself and for other people that you care about. But that connection, it's again, it's part of that connection. If they understand the connection between their behavior and that potential risk, and you can basically make that risk real as opposed to something, that's.
As with everything else, there isn't some best solution that will work for every organisation, for every individual. It's pretty clear, and we can agree that force patching on startup at the start of the day or whatever else is an atrociously bad idea. Putting it entirely in the hands of the user and saying do whatever you feel like is also a really bad idea. So in between that, you're going to trade off between those two states and think, well, I don't want to interrupt important people doing important tasks. I do want them to be able to get on and it's not really hassle, but security is still important. So, we'll find some compromise solution, and understanding your workforce and the kind of, you work with technical minded people who are security savvy and aware, and they probably will. They'll think, well, I will make sure I've made some time about patch today, and then, so therefore you can do them one kind of policy, and you work with people that have no clue about security or whatever else, you may take a much more stringent.
You can usually find, we've always found it's like, it's like just having that dialogue with line managers, you can find the right windows of opportunity when it causes the least, when it causes the least problems to people. And that can make a huge, it basically, we did that all those years ago, even at BT, for the password resets, to basically, if you're enforcing regular password resets, to make sure they get done at a time when it doesn't, when it causes the least disruption, i.e. when there's most slack in the work on certain periods of the week, when there is, when they're not at the peak load, and they're sort of like, they're really basically under a lot of pressure, finding like the more quiet periods, of time, and so on. Just scheduling things that way can make quite a bit of difference. But that is, as Adam said, is you can't do that. There isn't a general blueprint you can hand out to everybody. It depends on the organisation. But I can't really, this engagement between, this dialogue between the security people and the business people to basically fit it better into the activities.
Well, maybe minimally we could measure it, right? I mean, if you're going to force a reboot or force a password change at a certain time, you can give. I know you don't like what I did, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how angry are you that
Well, this is exactly what we're working with some of the surveys to basically get these. So it's one question here and then Adam.
It seems to me, though, that you could approach this same forced reboot problem from the other side of rather than decreasing the perceived cost, rather than kind of increasing the perceived benefit of like saying, what if you get hacked? Look at the benefit of doing a quick reboot. You could decrease the perceived cost easily, like make it so that the system recognizes that when the user hits the sleep button, it waits 5 minutes, wakes up the computer from sleep, sees what programs are open, puts them temporarily in the startup folder, does a reboot, and then goes back to sleep.
We can minimize it. I mean, there's all sorts of clever things we could do, I think, but just way to do it. I agree, basically that we could But in order to figure that out, you need to get a better understanding, of really when those good and bad periods are.
And something like that would fit into the sort of compliance decision diagram. Under design, you've reduced the effort that users perceive they're under from one thing, which means you can either make them happy or spend it elsewhere and get more secure or something else, whatever else. So that kind of redesign,
I think it's like secure delete, basically it's like the implement, basically most people won't do the secure, most users won't do the secure delete, when they're busy and they need to get on with things, but they're quite happy to, if you basically just say, when I log out or when you next get an idle period off, I just basically run the secure, just basically put it on a stack and then run the secure delete then, it's things like that. Very adamant.
Okay. Actually, I had a question.
Yeah.
Had you considered using the diagram you showed with the feedback loops? Had you considered using concepts from social optimums in policy decisions?
Can you repeat the question?
Have you considered using the economic concept of social optimums and using externalities to move markets or organizational behavior to a place in which the compliance actually means a bit of a cost or price threshold?
No, we haven't, but it's a really good idea.
There's many of the things that you were describing, so the providing feedback, we tend to, in economics, we tend to talk about them as either taxes or subsidies. And you can either tax or subsidize the demand or the supply. So either the software becomes reusable, and so there's a lower compliance cost, or we subsidize user behavior so the demand actually increases. And the combination of those behaviors will actually move overall behavior to a place that's socially optimal.
Yeah.
We tend to think about that when we talk about pollutants in an environment, or maybe one particular company doesn't care about pollution, but the overall organization of the market does care. And so we use compliance policies or public policy to actually move the market in a way that's better for everybody. So just as a feedback for talking about the models in economic terms.
That's great. I think that's a really good idea. Thank you. I don't know that one actually, because it also connects it to some other things we've been looking at, which is actually to move the security to basically sort of like connect it to one of the other discussions we've had is basically to connect it to remuneration. To basically make to make it part of the psychological contract and the job performance, to make security part of that. I mean, there are some organizations, some industry sectors where it really is, where they're seriously considering this now. For instance, any companies connected to critical national infrastructures, and it's part of, you really sort of like make it part of the professional ethos, and it's part of the assessment, evaluation, and remuneration. So I think
there was one organization, it was that actually trialled having kind of managers' salaries was dependent on the security performance of their work. So if your team didn't patch or whatever else, then your pay got done.
Yeah.
I think it's a horrible.
But actually, I was like using the motivational, rather than basically using negative motivation, to actually use the positive one. Is this a good idea?
So Angela, I want to go back to the authentication stuff you were talking about at the beginning of the talk, and you kind of pointed out that a lot of the schemes fall at different points on the trade-offs between ability to get back into your account, security, and efficiency of using the computer.
Yeah.
So is your conclusion that there's sort of a different method for each authentication situation, or do you think the passwords are actually kind of the best thing?
No, different. It's the first one. I think we need to diversify.
And so we need to diversify. Have you gone down a road of getting specific about the situations in which each mechanism?
Yeah, we're actually running a web-based service study where we ask people to log in at using passwords at different frequency intervals. So one cohort will log in every working day, and then with decreasing frequency, once a week, once every 2 weeks, up to kind of once every couple of months. We're trying to find a point at which passwords, and we allow them to reset their passwords if they forget. So we're trying to find a point at which the reset frequency overtakes the successful login frequency, at which point you may as well issue a one-time credential rather than having to stomach your own password, because all they're doing is resetting.
And we're running this at the moment in the first trial with passwords, pins, and the GrIDsure system, which is up there, but we want to add basically, it's simply because that trial alone needs 160 people, over 4 weeks. So we're going to run, just want to see how well that's going before we add the other mechanisms to it. So we're hoping to basically get some performance data.
There's people I've interviewed that, to illustrate why there isn't really one size fits all. They have an infrequent use password they use for things like booking holidays and some of their kind of HR stuff that they don't use very often. It has a very, very punitive requirement and a very long history. So every time they log in, they tend to reset their password, which then they can't use a similar one because the history kicks them out. So they have to choose one that's long and hard to remember because it's not like the other ones. They forget it again and then reset. So the whole thing is basically a self-perpetuating thing where they just, no one ever uses their actual password. All they do is when they want to log in, they just click reset, get a new one, use it. It's basically used as a one-time credential thing, but they have to go through a complex part of the reset process rather than doing it.
And it would be better to just have a properly working one time.
That's a waste of resources for the organisation and a waste of time for the people. You may as well just have something else in place.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's finding the points at which you transition from that, from one stage to another is kind of what we should be doing.
But it's really, I'm now kicking myself to a certain extent. I'm thinking like, this is the stuff we're doing now, we should have done it 10 years ago. We should have actually collected this data 10 years ago. But I was kind of like, always hoping somebody else might do it. Nobody does, so fine, right? So we're doing this now to basically get, and we're basically using a combination of, we've done lab studies where we literally have clock, so we've measured the execution time for different credentials, so we know objectively how long it takes. Then we're doing the field trials where we ask people to log in at certain frequencies, and we've designed it to give them a primary task where they need to basically they get paid by basically logging in and doing things, and the security mechanism is just one of it. So we need to basically do that. The other thing is just to basically we want to do a classification of different tasks and how disruptive it is to basically being logged out. But so we're starting to collect lots of data. In some organizations we've managed to make some good headway. If you can connect it with the logs in the company, you can basically look at the login frequencies, you can look at which accounts fail, how often, on which credentials. So by putting these sort of you can actually triangulate and start to get a pretty good, we're hoping to build a profile where you can say if it's used this frequently, with these types of users, then this mechanism is not going to work. But I think in general, I would still argue is we need to, you would help users a lot by diversifying and having a sort of a selection of 3 or 4 different authentication mechanisms for different types of login situations they have in their working day.
I don't much like praising Intel, but they have, in another security context, they have a scheme where they, from time to time, they choose a random computer, say, pretend company XYZ is suing us on a bogus patent, and do pretended pre-trial discovery of that machine, and figure out how much damage the files can do. And that makes people may get even more cynical about pre-trial security, but discovery, but at least they get less cynical about what's called security.
Yeah, it makes, it's a way of making threats, basically for users, it's a way of making users understand what the actual risk is associated with it and connected to their very own behavior.
Going back to the kind of forced reboots and enforcing anything in a particular time, the thing that it's that the attitude that leads to that is basically says that I don't know whatever it is you're doing right now, but I have decided that what I want is more important than what you want, and I don't know who you are or what you're doing, or you could be the CFO just about to release the financial alert. Doesn't matter. That doesn't make me optimistic about the willingness to, there's been a bunch of stuff in Unusable security about kind of trade-offs, but many of the things seem of the flavor where, for example, if you make things, password policies too strong, people write them down. And security people get that. They get, that's not the outcome I wanted, right?
Yeah.
Or like the site key stuff. You say, okay, I understand that the outcome produced is not the outcome. They respond to that, but I'm not sure I yet see the buy-in from security people that in addition there's trade-off, that you could be, yes, this is more secure, A is more secure than B, but it is only a teeny little bit more secure and is a great deal less usable. I'm not sure yet I see that, that the weighting between, I think they see that when A is not different from B in terms of actual outcome, that I'm willing to go along with.
In terms of the outcome for security.
But in terms of, no. The whole attitude seems to be, I can't even measure security, but if this is better than that in a security sense, I really don't care to hear.
Well, I hope that the tool that basically Simon Parkin at Newcastle has developed, where we've worked with him, because basically we've tried this, we've done a prototype of the tool, and we basically have shown it we've done sessions with various CISOs, where we've given them, said like, you're a CISO, here's 3 different scenarios, you need to make a decision about security, so one is basically like, cloud computing, password cracking, so you have decided you need 12 character passwords, for everything. And basically then say like, maybe, is it now time to consider maybe changing the security mechanism altogether, Other one is a hot desking scenario, and I can't remember what the third one is. And it's all about, because they are now so under pressure to justify the cost of it. It's, and as I said, don't talk to them about usability. Just show the cost as an impact on productivity, and that gets, then that's the way of getting that. I think at the moment we found, when you talk to them, I mean, there's actually very few CISOs who really intentionally want to annoy, and they don't enjoy being this kind of like hate figure. And basically they still, I mean, they actually, when you talk, one of Debbie Ashenden at Cranford, she's done interviews with CISOs, and they're desperate to change, they currently have this image of being a corporate bully, sort of like they're like the office bully, and they really say like, oh, we want to be security cheerleaders, we want to be like positive, and we want to get everybody on board, and even those guys, basically, when it comes to making a decision, they can't get out of their skin, and it's one of those specific things, because it's this dreaded best practice that makes them stick with it. Basically, like, as long as what I do is no worse than what everybody else, no less secure than what everybody else does, then that's okay. The other thing is that but you get that sometimes. It's the peer, the peer pressure and the peer recognition is that even when they're very willing to consider usability, what their peers think about what they're doing is still ultimately more important to them. It's basically, it's like some developers, who say like, yeah, of course I don't want to intentionally annoy users, but if my fellow developers think what I'm doing is stupid or not, not the most clever thing I could have possibly done, then that's kind of like more, and you need to really that's not going to change until the true cost of doing that on the day-to-day operations becomes visible to them. So
well, we have just started trying to find alternative options. Like some of our studies reveal that in terms of passwords, people find it easier to cope with longer passwords than ones with great character variety. So if you are trying to increase the security of your passwords versus some sort of theoretical financial inputs, sort of cracking or whatever else, then you're better off mandating longer passwords rather than making people go through the thing. So again, you're hitting the same security point, but it is through a less exposed group of users. So you're right, I don't think it's a very pointing uptake at the minute, but it would be nice to be able to present data that showed that you quantify these options in that kind of sense, and that's something that I'm starting to work towards.
It's also the case that increasing the length by just a little bit does a lot more than increasing the space of characters.
Yes, that's exactly. And it's quite interesting. One of the studies we're doing at the moment is also, basically, we're just trying, basically trading the complexity of the password for delay. So actually, because if you use slow hashing, it will make the login slightly longer to execute. But actually, it's quite, I don't know, we'll see. It might actually, it seems, it's looking quite promising at the moment, that at least for sort of like medium to infrequently used passwords, users would actually prefer to wait a little longer for it to execute by being able to use a less complex password.
More on the issue of character space. Have you done usability studies when somebody is holding a phone with one hand, which is why I hate uppercase?
Yes, yeah.
Because I only got one hand to type.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Or using our unified communication phones.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, the crazy phones.
But that is, again, it's like, again, I would say it's like, you shouldn't use, what you're using on a keyboard is not what you should be using on the phone.
But we are forced to.
Yeah, you should have something. But there again, so I would say, it's like if the simplest from a usability point of view, it's like if you have a supporting task, you would try and make it as little effort as possible. So if you're using a voice channel, why not exploit the modality of interaction and use voice authentication? That would be, from a user effort point of view, the best solution in that particular situation.
Or just think your password.
Or just think your provided you're happy to run around with an EEG detector on your
I think you might have misunderstood the question here, at least what I heard from it was that you're talking on the phone to someone and you need to enter a password on your keyboard, like logging
and re-enter the password.
Whilst you're on the phone.
As you're entering. You need to hold shift as you're typing in that password, and you can't do that well with one hand.
I would say you've got two communicate, yeah, yes. So, what do you mean you don't have a headset?
So maybe we should wrap it up there. But Angela and Adam are going to be around for the next 2 days. So if anyone really wants to talk to them, please drop me a line and we can get set up. And we'll probably be wandering over for lunch if anyone cares to join us. So we're going to go to the Commons, but I think it's kind of raining outside still. So maybe just the infamous Building 99 cafeteria would be best. Is it drizzling outside?
Someone open that door.
Somebody open that door and look out. Josh, open that door and look out.
Otherwise we need to go to the company store again.
Let's try.